To play around with cursors, I'll use my movie data database. And there, remember, we had movies where, if I counted, we have 240 documents. By the way, count is already one method. We can chain on a cursor because find gives us a cursor. So whatever we call here is called on the cursor. And count simply has a look at the cursor and determines how many elements can I get from the cursor. So that's important. How does this work technically? Well, on the database side, the query will already have ran, and therefore information like this is already loaded into memory and ready to be delivered to us. So it's not like that if we now cycle through all the elements, we have to manually read them from a file. They have been loaded efficiently into memory there already. So now, with this, we can of course execute find with the pretty command, and the pretty command is really just a utility command. We could also output it like this and get a bunch of documents. To be precise, 20. That is just something the shell does for us, and the shell also gives us this shortcut to type IT to get the next 20. And we can do this until this is exhausted. The IT command will not be available to you when working with a driver, and there you will indeed work differently with the cursor. So on find, then in most drivers you will have some next method you can call. Now, if I call next here, I get back exactly one document. Hence you also see no type IT to see more at the bottom. I get back exactly one document because next gives me the next document. The cool thing is, now that I called next, I got back GLI with the ID 8. If I call it again, I get back the next document in line. However, this again is GLI because this query is now basically executed from scratch. This is different if I store my data cursor, however you want to name it, could name it just cursor, in a variable or constant. And since the shell uses JavaScript, I can use JavaScript syntax to create such a variable here. So here I can use db movies find without any condition to find all. And now I can use my data cursor here with next to get the first element, which again is GLI with the ID 8. And if I now use that same cursor again with next, I get a different element with the ID 7, homeland. And if I type this again, I get yet another document, ID 5, True Detective. So this is the cursor doing his work. The cursor also has other methods. So that was our data cursor here. If I execute it like this, it gives me 20 documents again. But if I use that data cursor, I also can specify a for each method. Now again, this will vary on the driver you're using. For JavaScript, you can use it like this. For each takes a function that will be executed for every element that can be loaded through the cursor. And now in there, we therefore get the document. Now this is just a special function syntax provided by JavaScript with that arrow here. Here is the input to the function, which is given to us by the for each method. And here is then our function body, where we write what we want to do. And then we got print JSON, which is a method provided by the shell to output the document. And what this would do now is it would cycle through all the documents that are in the cursor. And that, by the way, are only documents we didn't look at yet. So the 2 we fetched via next and the 20 we fetched via just typing the cursor name will be excluded. And now we will cycle through the remaining documents which we haven't fetched yet. And it will fetch them from the database and output them here, as you see. And that is why you see no type it to see more at the bottom, because we did now fetch all documents in the database simply with for each. So this is another way of using the cursor to go through all the documents. And of course, inside of the function you execute on every document, you could also have some condition, a if check, to, for example, see if you want to output that document. Though, just be aware, if you use a if check to filter out a document, it would be more efficient to filter that already as a filter in the find method and not fetch it from the database. Because here, you're only filtering on the client side. That, of course, is not as efficient as filtering on the MongoDB server side. But you can run any code you want on all the documents, or as I mentioned, use next to only fetch one at a time. By the way, if I execute next now, I get an error because the cursor has been exhausted. You can check for that manually with the has next field here. Function, excuse me. Has next function. This is false, and this indicates there is no data to be fetched. If I recreate my cursor by again reassigning it, and this was a constant, so I'm not allowed to do that. So let's create a new one, just named cursor. So now I'm creating a new cursor based on the same query, but the shell doesn't know that. So I got a new cursor. Now on that cursor, if I call hasNext, I get true. And hence I can safely execute next. Now, with cursors, you can do a couple of other things too. There are other methods you can execute. And again, this is something which you can always, of course, find in the official docs. There, under MongoDB CRUD operations, query documents, you want to have a look at iterate a cursor in the Mongo shell to learn more about using that cursor and different ways of iterating through it. And we'll also have a look at how to use a cursor in the environment of our MongoDB drivers. It is important for you to understand what a cursor is and why it exists, though, and I hope this became clearer.